cases, the fact that one of them made the right financial choices in a few, literally a handful of situations throughout his life. Mm-hmm. And this is what people need to understand. First of all, you start by figuring out what needs to be avoided. Then you start in chapter 5, I tell people, I like to call them the virtues of wealth management, that they should be embracing. And in that section, I primarily guide them through mindset-related issues. What kind of a way of thinking I'd encourage, stuff like that. And as you've seen, I don't start by telling people, okay, invest this much in stocks, this much in bonds, this much in real estate, and thanks for buying my book. Yeah. I take it, again, this is most of the value that I'm able to provide. Mm-hmm. Okay, one dimension is my experience and actually knowing my audience, but the other dimension is that I put a balanced perspective on the table and I give people a coherent plan. Start by figuring out what the mistakes you need to avoid are. Then continue by deciding which mindset you're going to adopt as an investor. And only then is it time for us, which of course I've done in the book, to analyze various asset classes. And once again, something that sets me apart from most economists is the fact that you're going to find information in my book, not just about stock, bonds, and traditional assets. I also have an entire section about exotic assets, domain names, websites, cryptocurrencies, peer-to-peer lending, and so on. Mm-hmm. I've covered them in detail, but again, there's a time and a place for everything. And I think most of the value in my book is the fact that I give people a coherent, logical, and relatively easy to follow path.
Mm-hmm. In your book, and I don't know if maybe you covered this in your book or probably other parts of your videos, but obviously in helping people with mindsets, one of those challenges is fear. In your own life or maybe in your own teaching, how do you approach fear or teach others to approach fear and overcome it?
Strangely enough, I've written remarkably a lot for an economist about fear in my book, and it's really funny that you're asking me this, despite the fact that we never had a conversation about anything like this before. Mm-hmm. I actually have an entire consistent section in my book about how to inform yourself, because to be a good investor, you have to be very good and balanced when gathering information. And I have a section about, mainstream media outlets, how they frequently feed you misleading information and so on. So I have a section that talks about the threats of mainstream media. But I have a section which also talks about the threats of alternative media. And in that section, I cover the fact that on the internet, there's an entire industry of fear mongering. The world's going to end, doom and gloom, and so on. And I would say that as an investor, having the right attitude towards fear is important. As an investor, you cannot afford to live in fantasy land and become kind of like a mindless consumer that mainstream media outlets would frequently like you to be, because you buy the stuff that's advertised on them. It's obviously what's in their best interest. So no, that extreme should be avoided. But at the same time, this doesn't mean you should become Chicken Little. This doesn't mean you should hide under a rock and watch videos about financial zombie apocalypse each day. In my book, I teach people to find the right balance. So I address that kind of fear, the fact that, okay, you shouldn't be a mindless optimist, but then again, you shouldn't be a doom and gloomer either. And I also talk about the fear of having skin in the game, of making choices, of making financial choices. This is a fear you have to overcome, and you overcome it by embracing, I would say, a healthy attitude towards failure. Because I'm sorry, but if you've developed the habit of being depressed each time one of the assets you have exposure to goes down in value, then you're not going to make a very good investor. Mm-hmm. You have to, in my book, I believe I've done a good job of helping people, understand that as an investor, as a balanced investor, especially, there are going to be losses. You're not going to always be able to pick the winners. There are going to be times of prosperity, times of calamity, and so on. But at the end of the day, it's all a matter of mindset,
In your own work and in your own business, because obviously you spend a lot of time writing and analyzing, how do you manage your own time? Are there routines or rituals that you have, or how do you know in your day what you want to focus on at various times that keep you productive?
I would say that in my life, at least, the key is doing what makes me hungry. The aspect that set me apart, especially at the beginning in all of my projects, was the fact that I was always willing to bend over backwards for the dollar that other people were too lazy to pick up, you know? Mm-hmm. So why did I do that? Because I was hungry. I wanted it so much. I wanted it. I loved everything about it. I wanted it. I knew it had to be done. It's the kind of hunger that gives you an edge over other people. And productivity-wise, let me just say that when I work on something related to that deep hunger I feel inside me, I'm multiple orders of magnitude more productive than when working on things I kind of sort of like, but not really. So I would say the most essential productivity tip I have for people, and it's a tip they don't come across very often, is simply to do what makes them hungry. And it's primarily the reason why I've decided to write books, why I've decided to publish videos on YouTube and so on. It's certainly not about the money. I could make a lot more money just focusing all of my energy on, for example, investing in domain names. But the thing I, for one, am guided by, my compass, is to a large degree influenced by what makes me hungry. Investing in domains, that puts money on the table. That puts more money on the table than writing books, than publishing YouTube videos. But does it make me hungry? Does it still make me hungry? And the answer is no. The type of satisfaction, fulfillment, and hunger to become better, to do more, that I feel when writing a book or working on my videos or generally speaking, being a teacher, as I've said at the beginning of this interview, it's precisely this type of hunger that sets me apart. So do, for the love of God, do whatever it is keeps you hungry. That is my number one productivity tip by far. Mm-hmm.
If you were to give advice to someone who was just starting off, and let's say they want to be a writer and kind of do what you do, what advice would you give them about starting off, or kind of real world information would you tell them about what it is to have a day-to-day job as a working writer?
Okay, that's a tough one. So first of all, I would say that if you are thinking about becoming a writer for the money, if you have bills to pay, families to feed, and are counting on that money that you're going to make as a writer to make ends meet, then my number one advice for you is don't. Just don't. Writing is not something that's going to pay well in the beginning. Writing is not something you should be doing for the money. And let me just say that if your main concern is financial in nature, there are better ways to reach your financial goals than writing books. Which brings me to my second scenario. If it's something you're passionate about, if it's something you enjoy doing, and if you are financially, especially, it would help a lot. If you're also financially comfortable enough to be able to just focus on meaningful writing, on writing that you don't do to pay the bills. Because that is the kind of writing that has the most impact. That is the kind of writing that you are most passionate about. If you're going to be a writer, I would definitely focus on that, because in my career, I've noticed a lot of people who churn out content and treat writing as if they own a factory, so to speak. You know, a factory which churns out words. For example, I'm a member of perhaps the most popular forum among writers on the internet, and I frequently come across people who say that they write a novel once every 2 months. Now, let me just ask you, what kind of a novel can that be? You know, what kind of an epic, drama-filled, meaningful piece of work can a novel be that you finish in 60 days? That's the problem I have with a lot of writers and with the world in general, so to speak. Mm-hmm. The fact that you have people with attitudes like those, and I'm sure they have valid reasons, again, families to feed, money to make, and so on. But I would, if possible, advise people against embracing business models which revolve around, okay, I'm a factory, I have to churn out 6 novels a year. That is something I wouldn't recommend, especially if you want to stand out in this world. Mm-hmm. And this is a world in which the average individual is bombarded from all directions with information. Everyone wants your attention. People on YouTube, people who are writing books, everyone is desperately competing for a minute of your attention, so to speak. And most of the information that's circulating out there is noise. You should not be the person who writes 60-day novels. You should be the person who writes meaningful stuff that touches people, stuff that genuinely triggers deep emotional reactions and so on. So if possible, my number one piece of advice would be this. Write from a position of strength, write from a position which allows you to do what you love. If you make compromises, again, I'm going to understand it, but the likelihood of standing out as a writer is pretty slim. If you focus, again, just like with domain names, focus on quality over quantity.
What would you say is the best advice you've ever received?
That is a tough one, but it's an advice, it's a quote I never heard from anyone else, and I tried to Google it and I didn't find any other source for it. But one of the most popular domain investors ever, it's a guy who started out in the 90s, who's genuinely kind of like a legend. And he remembered this piece of advice that he received from a boss of his when he was young, and which goes like this. If you see John Jones with John Jones' eyes, you will sell what John Jones buys. And it's so ridiculously simple and simplistic, and your first reaction might be to disregard it, but so much in business and life, in investing, in writing, and so on, revolves around seeing John Jones with John Jones' eyes, deeply connecting to him, deeply understanding him. There's a world of a difference between a personal finance book written by an economist who has no contact with his audience compared to one written by someone who is a part of his audience, who is, in my case, it's someone who makes money online. For other books, it can be something else. But it's precisely this celebration of human diversity, of the fact that, no, John Jones is not like me. John Jones is John Jones. And if I want to meaningfully get to know John Jones, then I'm going to have to make an effort to get out of my comfort zone, to venture out of my bubble, and to make an honest effort, which most people don't, to see other people through their own eyes, to embrace other viewpoints, to get to know other people. This is perhaps the main value that the internet gives us. You have 6-7 billion John Jones who are, potentially people that you can learn from, potentially people that you can, who can have an impact on your life, and so on. I would say that this strange quote that I have no idea where it originally came from, maybe the guy in question found out about it from another person himself, but it is ridiculously accurate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. The idea of being empathetic and realizing that what you're doing isn't for you, but it's for somebody else. And if you want them to get value out of it, you have to understand what it is that their needs and wants and goals are. So that I've never heard that rhyme before, but it's fantastic. I'm going to have to write that down and use it. So I want to thank you so much, Andrei, for taking time out of your busy day to chat with me. If the listeners would like to hear more and see more about what you're working on, what is the best way they could do that?
First of all, thanks a lot for having me, and thanks a lot, guys, for listening. If you have any questions, feel free to send me a message, to reach out to me. You can do that by visiting youtube.com/1minuteeconomics, and you can find an about section there where my email address is listed, or you can visit the website of my book, which is wealthmanagement2.com, which also has